The backdrop, if you like, in terms of the growth in liquid alternatives has been the mainstream investor base, being able to access strategies that historically were reserved for institutional investors or for ultra high net worth investors.
So Andrew, can you explain to us what liquid alternatives are?
Well, liquid alternatives are one of the fastest growing asset classes for investors these days when it comes to diversifying their portfolios. People often think of alternatives in the traditional sense, which are often illiquid asset classes like real estate or infrastructure or other types of illiquid credit, for example. Whereas liquid alternatives, by definition, are offering clients liquidity, so typically daily dealing, but where the underlying strategy offers them a diversifying return stream, be it long-short strategies or be it even long-only strategies, but where the underlying asset class is alternative and liquid, like commodities, for example.
So what are some of the myths and misconceptions surrounding liquid alternatives?
Well, the backdrop, if you like, in terms of the growth in liquid alternatives has been the mainstream investor base, being able to access strategies that historically were reserved for institutional investors or for ultra high net worth investors. And so one of the myths about investing in alternatives is it's only really for the high net worth individuals or institutions, whereas with liquid alternatives, the minimum investments are often $1 to $5,000 or $10,000, not, for example, $5 million in the case of several offshore hedge fund investments. So one of the myths around liquid alternatives are that they're not actually reserved for institutional investors. They're actually widely available to a much more retail audience, which is great because it means that they can now benefit from some of the strategies that historically were reserved for institutions.
So what are the trends in liquid alternatives, and is Schroders making any innovative products to meet client demand?
So liquid alternatives is really hedge funds in a mutual fund format. So if you think about hedge fund strategies, long-short equity, CTA macro, which are these hedge fund strategies that can invest in many asset classes and many geographies. These strategies are now widely available, as I said before, and Schroders offers roughly just over 20 mutual funds with a liquid alternative investment mandate and roughly $16 billion. And this year we launched with a sub-advisor called 2 Sigma. And this sub-advisor is one of the world's largest, most prestige hedge fund firms that runs systematic strategies. But the important thing is they're actually a technology company. They're not an asset manager. So they see themselves first and foremost as a technology company. They hire people out of academia, they hire people out of big technology companies like Google, but they apply their technology platform to the domain of finance. And they have roughly 2/3 of their employees researching data, analyzing data. These are people, for example, with artificial intelligence backgrounds and looking for clever ways to predict which way securities and which way markets will behave.
So finally, why is it a good time to invest in liquid alternatives?
So if you think about where we are in the global economy these days, and you think about the volatility we've had this year, it's really unclear where we go from here, but what is for certain is to expect more volatility and more uncertainty as it relates to elections or assets around the world. Equities and bonds feel quite rich and feel quite highly valued. And so it's quite difficult for investors to know where to put their money. And if they go to safe havens like cash, often they earn nothing or maybe even have to pay money to have their cash on deposit. So liquid alternatives by nature are diversifying strategies. Many strategies run with a very tight risk control and are quite suitable for investors who are looking to diversify away from traditional long-only equities and long-only bonds in this time of heightened uncertainty.
Well, thank you, Andrew, for speaking with us today. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you.